Thank you very much for coming to JFK Plus 50. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mike Eberts.
Great, thank you, Martin. Martin is one of my many very fine students in Mass Comm 101, and this presentation is a testimony to their turning out and their helping with this so that it'll work. Well, it's 12:30 on November 22. 50 years ago, Central Time, this is exactly when shots rang out. So let's talk about what happened 50 years ago, and then we'll talk about how information was disseminated then, how it's disseminated now, and how we might look at JFK in the years ahead. Well, John F. Kennedy was looking ahead toward the 1964 presidential campaign. He was a popular president. Things were looking good. He was young. He was healthy, although we've learned later about his Addison's disease, which could have flared up at any time. But he was definitely running in 1964. And he had won Texas in 1960, perhaps because his running mate was Lyndon Johnson from Texas. And so the trip to Fort Worth and to Dallas in late November of 1963 was to shore up support in a key electoral state. Dallas was not particularly Kennedy territory. It was a deeply conservative city. The American ambassador to the UN, the liberal Adlai Stevenson, had been harassed and shoved around a little bit, not too long before. But Kennedy had something going for him as he went to Fort Worth and to Dallas that day. And that was a quality that would only be described as being like a rock star. So when he landed at Love Field, among others, Joe Long, a local broadcaster in Dallas, took the loudspeaker and emceed the arrival of the president. And this is what it was like.
The weather couldn't be better. We have a brilliant sun at this moment, and here comes the president now. In fact, he's not in his limousine. He's departed the limousine, and he is walking. He is reaching across the fence, shaking hands with many of the people who have come here to see him. He is closely accompanied by Dallas police officers and, of course, the Secret Service. He is now shaking hands, and they are walking along the line of the fence, shaking hands with some of the hundreds of people who have come here to view their arrival. And now, the President and First Lady are retreating from the fence. They're heading now for the official limousine where Governor Connolly stands, waiting their arrival so that they can make their way downtown and out to the Trade Mart. But this is one of those impromptu moments for which President Kennedy is so well known. So many times you have heard that the Secret Service men suddenly find themselves without the president, but suddenly he has left them and stepped into the crowd, the milling throng, and decided to shake hands and give his personal greeting. And this, once again, he did. There's the gunmetal gray limousine, blue and gray, pulling away now from the fenced area. The president and Mrs. Kennedy.
All right. What President Kennedy had on his side in that conservative city in Texas was a personal approval rating that averaged 70.1% throughout his presidency. So even in parts of the country that were not exactly Kennedy territory, there was a lot of popular adulation, especially when he brought along the very popular First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. That said, this flyer was passed around Dallas before his arrival. So you could see there was an undercurrent of anger. This is the famous Lincoln limousine that the president was in during the motorcade. It did have a bubble top, and that bubble top was almost put on that day. The weather in Dallas that day was a little bit like the weather here today. It was rainy in the morning, and then the sun came out. And the Secret Service agents, maybe one of the reasons why they took the bubble top off was that they knew that Kennedy didn't like it. He didn't like barriers in general. He was known for just plunging into the crowd like he did in that previous clip. That was a very Kennedy-ish thing to do. And the other thing, on a more practical basis, is the bubble top was just really hot. You know, when the sun would beat down on it, it was uncomfortable. So the decision was made, go with the open convertible. The motorcade route had been announced ahead of time. It was a parade. It was a campaign event. People were expected to come out and cheer the president. Downtown Dallas had plenty of office buildings from probably 1900 to 1960. Buildings built before there was air conditioning. So there were literally thousands of open windows along the campaign route. And in an era that I guess was a little less security conscious than today, sadly, not all those windows were secured. The first word that something may have happened was over the radio. There was a local Dallas broadcaster, Sam Pate, and he was covering the motorcade as a joyous parade, a happy event. And he had just thrown the coverage to his colleague down the line by the Trade Mart, when he had realized that, I just heard something that didn't sound good.
Hello, Brown. We're here at the Trade Mart. The motorcade is coming by here. I can see many, many motorcycles coming by now. Police motorcycles. Just heard a call on the radio for all units along Industrial to pick up the motorcade. Something has happened here. We understand there has been a shooting. The presidential car coming up now. We know it's the presidential car. You can see Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. There's a Secret Service man, spread eagle over the top of the car. We understand Governor and Mrs. Conway are in the car with President and Mrs. Kennedy. We can't see who has been hit, if anybody's been hit, but apparently something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong. I'm in behind the motorcade doing the phone, and it looks as though they're going to Parkland Hospital.
Something was terribly wrong. Back in New York, this campaign event was not a particularly big story. The president was going to Texas to shore up support. Some of the White House press corps had gone. But to give an idea of how constricted the coverage was in the first few moments, the entire White House press corps, figuring that it would just be a routine event, they only had one phone to use to send in their stories. And so, as you might imagine, when shots were fired, that phone became incredibly popular. There was a reporter for the United Press International, Merriman Smitty Smith. And Smitty Smith had timing is everything, being in the right place, the right time. Smitty Smith was right next to the one phone. And so he dictated the first news releases to the UPI wire service. And newspapers and television stations all over the country got a 15-bell flash. A minor story may only get a few bells. A bigger story may get 5 or 8 bells. A 15-bell flash was what they called an earth shaker. And Smitty Smith sent out in a message probably not much longer than a tweet of today that shots had been fired at the motorcade, and the nation's newspapers and television stations and radio stations began to take notice. Walter Cronkite was in the CBS newsroom when this happened, CBS television. And obviously, when word came over the wire that shots had been fired at the motorcade, clearly it was going to be a big news day. However, Cronkite was not able to get on television immediately, and that was a technological barrier. The TV cameras of the day had vacuum tubes in them, and the vacuum tube powered TV cameras needed the better part of a half hour to warm up. So the first news bulletin that people saw just had one of these bumper cards. And note the little bit of struggle and shuffling of papers behind the scenes as Walter Cronkite told his network audience the first word of what was going on. This is As the World Turns, a soap opera. My mom used to watch it.
Real nice, little boy.
And I thought about it, and I gave it a great deal of thought now.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting. More details just arrived. These details about the same as previously. President Kennedy shot today just as his motorcade left downtown Dallas. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed Mr. Kennedy. She called, "Oh no," the motorcade sped on. United Press says that the wounds for President Kennedy perhaps could be fatal. Repeating, a bulletin from CBS News, President Kennedy has been shot by a would-be assassin in Dallas, Texas. Stay tuned to CBS News for further details.
And weirdly enough, CBS cut away to a coffee commercial. Well, very quickly, it became apparent that this was more than just shots fired at the motorcade. That Sam Pate was right. Something was terribly wrong. And on CBS, Walter Cronkite was very reticent to call the president dead. He wanted official government, official word that the president had indeed died. And as the reports got more and more grave, as Dan Rather, who at that time was a CBS correspondent in Dallas, as he spoke to the emergency room doctor, who talked about the president's chance of survival. There was even a report where a reporter had cornered a Catholic priest who had just given the president last rites, extreme unction. It was very clear that the president was dead or close to dead. And Walter Cronkite would not make that call until he had the absolute word, the official word. This is the vertical hold problem that TVs had in those days.
There has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into downtown Dallas, along with Governor Connolly of Texas. They've been taken to Parkland Hospital there, where their condition is as yet unknown. We have not been told their condition. At Dallas, in a downtown hotel room, a group had been gathered to hear President Kennedy when he was waiting his arrival. Let's switch down there now, where Eddie Barker of KRLD is on the air.
As you can imagine, there are many stories that are coming in now as to the actual condition of the president. One is that he is dead. This cannot be confirmed. Another is that Governor Connolly is in the operating room. This we have not confirmed. The president was whisked from the scene of the attempted assassination or assassination, depending upon his condition, of course, at this hour, by bus to Parkland Hospital, and the president undoubtedly is in the emergency room at that hospital, which would be on the first floor of Parkland. No word is yet. We are awaiting something more official. It is, of course, difficult, certainly, to go on.
This is the Dallas Trade Mart where the president was to give a talk to local businessmen. Of course, this talk was never given. At 5 minutes into this clip, and I'll go just before 5 minutes, Walter Cronkite, clearly struggling with his emotions, as I am now, makes the call.
That there might be demonstrations, at least, that could embarrass the president.
because it was only on October the 24th that our ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, was assaulted in Dallas, leaving a dinner meeting there. From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
Of course, because it was a much anticipated event, the president was coming to town. There were amateur photographers along the route. One of them was a local manufacturer of women's clothing, Abraham Zapruder. And he did not shoot the only home movie of the motorcade as it neared Dealey Plaza, but certainly the Zapruder film is the most famous of the amateur accounts of that day. And one of the maddening, frustrating things about this, something that just doesn't give us closure, is that I'm not sure that the Zapruder film that I'm going to show you is exactly what Abraham Zapruder shot in 1963. Among the things that, the controversies that rage over the assassination is whether these home movies were altered or not. What we know is that Mr. Zapruder gave up custody of the film and that it was for some period of time in the possession of the government, and for some amount of time it was in the possession of Time Life, the magazine publisher. But anyhow, this is, as far as I know, an accurate rendition of the Zapruder film. This version has been widened to be able to show everything that the camera captured. It's very short. And I did not put in the atmospheric music. This is about when the president is shot. He's clutching his throat. The First Lady is consoling him. Then comes the fatal shot. The First Lady is climbing out onto the trunk of the limousine to retrieve part of her husband's head. This is what he shot it with. Home movie camera. 8mm. He got that kind of elevated angle because he was standing on a concrete pedestal. His secretary was sort of steadying him because Mr. Zapruder was not a particularly young man. So there are many theories. There's the official theory, and then there are the many conspiracy theories of who shot JFK. I'm not going to make a call here. But what I think is the dividing line is those people who believe the official version, the Warren Commission report, named after, at that time, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. They believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole shooter and that he shot from here, his 6th floor sniper's nest, as it's called, in the Texas Book Depository building. And this was his angle down on the motorcade. Now, for those who believe in conspiracies, pretty much, if you believe in a conspiracy, you believe that there was one or more shooters in the grassy knoll. And, all these years I'd heard about the grassy knoll in my mind, and, it'd been built up into some big thing, but actually it's this little bump. And those conspiracy theories generally feel that if there was a shooter in the grassy knoll, was probably behind this picket fence. 2 days later, Sunday, it had already been a whirlwind of sorrow. The president was dead. The vice president was sworn in. There were plans for the president's funeral on Monday. The shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been arrested and was being interrogated. And on Sunday, Oswald was being transferred from the central Dallas police station, where he had been interrogated, to a longer-term holding cell at the county jail. And under what is said to be intense security, this man, Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner, that's if you say it politely. He was actually kind of a strip club owner. He walked up and shot Lee Harvey Oswald, not only right in the focus of much of the nation's media. This is Associated Press photo, the iconic Associated Press photo, but also in front of much of the Dallas police force. Now, there is TV footage of this, and many people saw it on TV. I did. But to me, the iconic call is by a radio reporter, Ike Pappas, who is reporting for WNEW New York. By Sunday, the nation's journalists had flown down to Dallas. So we'll get Ike Pappas's account.
Yeah, he's got it. There he is. There he comes.
Now the prisoner wearing a black sweater, he's changed from his T-shirt, is being moved out toward an armored car. Being let out by Captain Fritz. There is the prisoner. Do you have anything to say in your defense?
There's a shot. Oswald has been shot. Oswald has been shot. A shot rang out. Mass confusion here. All the doors have been locked.
Holy mackerel. A shot rang out as he was led into his car. The shot, there's a mass confusion there. Rolling and fighting. As he was being let out, now he's being led back. He was thrown to the ground. The police have the entire area blocked off. Everybody stay back. Is the yell. Did you see it? What happened?
Yeah, I saw the guy. There's a man, a rather stocky man with a hat on, a dark...
Stocky man with a hat on?
He crashed, and they shot him there, and I saw the flash, and Oswald said, and that's it.
Oswald doubled over. There was a big struggle on the ground. Just a moment earlier, I had, no doubt foolishly, jumped in front of him to get in a last question, to ask him what happened, whether he had anything to say in his defense, and then a split second later, the shot rang out.
I thought he was one of the detectives. You know, he had a hat, and stocky was with me. That's what I remember.
Had you seen him before? Had you seen him before?
I think he had his hat. There were none of us.
One of the wildest scenes I've ever seen.
I'm glad I was a little kid at that time, because if I was an adult and could really intellectualize what was happening, at this point, I would be afraid that the whole fabric of American society was beginning to dissolve before my very eyes. So let's talk about how information about the assassination was disseminated then versus how it is disseminated now. Back in 1963, you had a relatively few media sources, usually staffed by skilled professionals who were the gatekeepers. They made decisions as to what information should get out to the public and when. So there was a sense of professionality, there were standards, but it was also constricted. Today, anybody can put their theories online. This is called the democratization of information. And there's a lot of good things to be said for the democratization of information. For example, what if the official account is wrong? Well, then you become glad that there are those other many, many voices out there. However, the democratization of information also means that we become the gatekeepers today. Today, when we look at things like the Kennedy assassination or even what's happening in our own city council, if it is a blog post or if it's a tweet, if it's something that is done by a citizen journalist, now you have to be the gatekeeper and figure out, is this a credible source? Because some of the sources aren't credible. Note this graphic. This was a quote that was all over the internet, claiming that President Kennedy had just uncovered some shocking information. I don't even know about what. And that's what got him killed a week later. There's just one problem with this quote. Kennedy never said this. By the way, those people who are sort of like the rabble-rousers on the internet, one of the good things about them that you can spot them is they are lousy copy editors. They don't know how to spell assassination either. And sadly, people of my age know how to spell assassination. So the gatekeepers, the traditional gatekeepers, they go by these titles: editors, producers, publishers. The Warren Commission, there you go, that would be a commission. There was a later panel that sought to try to figure out whether Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. There was a House panel in 1979 that said there probably was a conspiracy. So we have the Warren Commission saying lone shooter. We have the House committee in 1979 saying probably a conspiracy, but they didn't know who. In academic journals, the gatekeepers are other professionals who do peer review. So today, I think as you try to learn more about President Kennedy, you need to be very discerning about what sources you go to if you really want good information. I have nothing against Jesse Ventura. He has several Kennedy conspiracy theory videos on the internet, but I would suggest that he is more in the entertainment business than in the serious pursuit of the truth. And I wish Mr. Ventura well, and I don't want him to come after me. I think something that is as touchy to the American psyche as the Kennedy assassination, if you really want an authoritative source that is also free to tell the truth, you may need to get outside the United States for your source. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. And, hey, the BBC has a good reputation. So, where are we now with President Kennedy? People who remember him, remember his presidency, we're not going to be around for the 100th. However, a lot of you will be. And so, what's going to go forward? I rarely script myself, but I did this time. Well, on that world-changing day 50 years ago, was President Kennedy the victim of a broad and powerful conspiracy, or was he simply the victim of an angry misfit with a mail-order rifle? We don't know, and I don't think we ever truly will. What we can examine with greater certainty is JFK's remarkable afterlife, as measured by his image today. A 2011 CNN poll of post-war presidents showed that John F. Kennedy was easily the most popular. Some 85% of Americans polled viewed JFK in a positive light. Bill Clinton edged out Ronald Reagan for second place, but they were considerably behind JFK. So, to what do we attribute this? Well, it certainly can't be a towering list of policy achievements. JFK simply didn't have enough time to reach his goals. In fact, of America's 44 presidents, only 6 served more briefly. His 1,036 days in office were not as long as Chester A. Arthur's tenure, but a little longer than Millard Fillmore's. And, as former Senator Lloyd Benson might have said, Millard Fillmore is no Jack Kennedy. Ask someone who's a little older about that, you students. I think the continuing allure of JFK is a confluence of 3 factors: tragedy, timing, and image. First, tragedy. For the great majority of you who weren't around a half century ago, let me try to convey what it was like. Teachers wept openly in front of their classes. Students told wild stories on the playground. In fact, one of my 3rd grade classmates at Los Feliz Elementary claimed that the president threw money out of his pockets when he was shot. I guess to an 8-year-old, I guess that's, he knew Mr. Kennedy was quite wealthy. Parents hoarded commemorative issues of Life magazine like they were family heirlooms. For years afterward, it was common to walk into a barbershop or a bakery and see a black-bordered picture of the slain president with a simple inscription. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 1917 to 1963. Impressionable little kids, me included, knew we had seen a tragedy that we would literally never forget. Now, JFK's allure is also a matter of timing. Presidents lose popularity the longer they serve. An ABC News poll released on Tuesday put President Obama's job approval rating at 42%, the lowest of his presidency. But he is not the only president to lose popularity the longer he served. Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the presidency 4 times, but each election was by a smaller margin. Eisenhower, Reagan, and other popular 2-term presidents all saw their approval ratings drop in their 2nd term. And unlike Bill Clinton, JFK never had to weather a personal scandal. The 3rd factor is image. JFK lives on in our imaginations in Technicolor and Kodachrome as the dashing young leader of what was then referred to, with maybe just a little bit of hubris, as the free world. He told us that America would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and we did it. He harnessed the idealism of young Americans, the same sort of young Americans who only a few years would become disillusioned, disaffected, and drugged out, by creating a Peace Corps. He steered us through arguably the most dangerous years of the Cold War abroad and through some of the most challenging years of the civil rights movement at home. At this point, I offer you closure of a sort. Tomorrow morning, visitors will continue to stream into the JFK Library in Boston and into the 6th floor museum in Dallas. The conspiracy-minded will continue to dissect the Zapruder film for clues. Scholars and journalists will continue to write JFK biographies, and people like me will continue to read them. But today is almost certainly the last time that America will stop and reflect on what happened 50 years ago and the dynamic young leader whose life was so brutally ended. I think the famously restless John F. Kennedy would advise us not to dwell on the past, but to move confidently into the future, and to do so with great vigor. Thank you. I have one more piece of video, and I was debating whether to put it in or not, because it didn't fit with the rest of it, but since I have a little bit of time, it's about 2 minutes, and it's happy, and I'm a sucker for a happy ending. And it says something about media. In 2013, we take control of our own media. And we create internet mashups. And we take icons. Icons are timeless symbols and people. And we mash them up in our own way. Now, I think that JFK is going to live on because he has simply passed into the realm of a symbol. And so I'm going to show a little 2-minute YouTube clip. I don't know who the person was who put this together, but clearly it was a science fiction fan. And I think this works on 2 levels. Number one, I think it shows off what the big deal is about regarding JFK. It shows off his rhetorical skills. Secondly, think about this speech in relation to how angry and gridlocked our government is today. And then, third, I had heard a factoid today that JFK, his image is polling very positively among people 18 to 29, which is just awesome. So let's see if I can bring this up. By the way, this graphic is the official presidential portrait of President Kennedy, painted posthumously, as you can see, 1970. Apparently, the artist said that he painted President Kennedy sort of thinking and with his head down because he didn't want to paint the eyes of a dead man. Okay. This is his famous moon speech at Rice University, 1962.
The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
That's the thing about an icon. They never truly leave us. I'll take questions. Yes?
So how do you think Fox News would have covered this assassination?
I could give a flip answer, but I'll give you a real one. I think very carefully. I think they would have had subdued coverage. I don't think that they would have done anything critical. I think they would have tried to blend into the crowd of coverage. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I would like your opinions on Oliver Stone's portrayal.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, at 1:30, yes, I will. At 1:30, and thank you for the cue. At 1:30, Friday Flicks, which is put on by Mike Petros, professor of media and all-around great guy, in San Gabriel 334, he will have a showing of Oliver Stone's film JFK. And that film really put the conspiracy side of things on the map. And whether the film is literal truth or not, it at least opened a lot of people's minds to that possibility. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the handbill in the first slide? Kind of like some of the hotbed of Texas radicalism or whatever?
Well, I know that I know that part of the complaint about Mr. Kennedy was they felt he was soft on communism, which is kind of an odd thing for the man who had a nuclear face down in the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. So some of it was, but then again, by 1963, what may have set off the conservative concern that he was soft on communism was that he had sought a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviets and was doing what he could to wind down the Cold War. But of course, these things get a momentum, and but the nuclear test ban treaty, I think, will be one of Mr. Kennedy's accomplishments. Yes, other questions?
Where were you?
Where was I? Well, I was in the 3rd grade at Los Feliz Elementary. I walked to school that morning along Hollywood Boulevard, as I always did. And on the way home, I had what you would now call a play date with my friend Greg. And because he lived north of the boulevard, his mom picked us up in her little English Ford, her little Anguilla. And I remember as Greg and I were getting in the car, Gladys, Greg's mom, said, "This is a dark day. You will always remember this." Yes, what else? Any other questions?
There's a story, Dr. Eberts. Nixon used to get drunk and yell at his picture. Later in his in the last, I think, maybe the last 6 months of his presidency when he filmed it, but he used to kind of sit there at night and kind of just have a conversation with JFK.
You know, Eddie, I think that one of the dangers to fall into is, maybe Mr. Nixon did that.
Yeah.
However, when we think about historical figures like Kennedy or Nixon, I think we sometimes lose track of, is this the Nixon in news stories? Is this the Nixon in newsreels? Or is this the Nixon that was played by Dan Aykroyd on Saturday Night Live? Or is this the Nixon in the Oliver Stone film? See, one of the things about information is it kind of gets all mushed together. So, I don't know, maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. I know that Mr. Nixon was reported to have sort of almost like a self-esteem issue, because he grew up in fairly humble circumstances, while Mr. Kennedy grew up in very privileged circumstances. Yes?
Do you think that it would affect our country differently if this would have happened now versus 50 years ago?
Well, the first thing is, if it happened now, Oswald would have had a real hard time pulling it off alone. When Bill Clinton visited Glendale College in 1996, some of you here were here for that event. The security was unbelievably tight. In that case, every window was secured. And, you got in with, metal detectors and all that kind of stuff. And, Oswald would have a much, much tougher time with today's security. Yes?
I've read the suggestion over this last week that the impact of the news in 1963 would be comparable to the reaction of the American public to 9/11. You think that comparison holds?
Yeah, we've lived through both of them, haven't we? All right, so how would it compare with September 11th? I know that one of the things that happens when there's a huge news story like either of those is that there's something in communications that they call the contagion effect. Contagious, like a contagious disease. And what that means is word generally spreads. It's neighbors talking to neighbors, or friends talking to friends, or mom calling her kids and saying, "Oh my God, did you hear what happened?" So I think that is a similarity. A difference may be that after September 11th, maybe we worried about our personal security a little more. And after the Kennedy assassination, it was more a sense of mourning. I think that would be a difference. I mean, certainly we mourned the people who died in the towers, but it's not like we had seen them on the news every night. Yeah.
Well, one aspect of the comparison in the article I read was that everything stopped in both cases and everyone was glued in 62 to the television.
Yes. Well, what I can remember happening over that weekend in 1963 was that, and this freaked me out as a little kid, all my regular shows were suddenly off the air. It was all news, all Kennedy, all the time, and it was like, wow. I mean, that, in my little kid mind, that was a one of the indicators that, gee, this is really, really big. With 9/11, by then we had CNN. And so if you wanted wall-to-wall TV coverage, you could just tune to CNN. And so the other networks, yeah, they covered it a lot, but I don't think they covered it around the clock. What else? Yes?
Was Kennedy going to remove the United States from the...
I know what you're going to ask. We don't know. There are some accounts that say that he was, and there are other accounts that say he might have gotten as mired in Vietnam as Lyndon Johnson did. President Kennedy had a way of coming up with his own solutions. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, he figured out a way to not attack and not back down. I think he had a chance to de-escalate in Vietnam, but we'll never know. We'll never know.
We've all lived in the post-JFK.
Mm-hmm.
What changed? I mean,
what changed?
What changed?
Huh.
How did society...
Yeah. There were... You hear people, older than me who will say, "Gosh, America changed that day." I wonder if Mr. Kennedy might have channeled the youth culture into a little bit more constructive direction than happened in the later part of the 1960s. I think that by the time you got later in the decade, you had young people who had lost all faith in institutions. And I think President Kennedy could have offered them something. So yeah, I think that's one way in which our course is different. Yes.
I'm a little bit older than you, and to address this this young man's question, I think that if it had only been this assassination, it would have had a certain horrible effect. But what followed was another assassination and another assassination and the horrible Vietnamese War, and I think that it became cumulative, that my generation, it was like, hit me once, hit me again, hit me another time. And all of that accumulation was, I don't know, some people say it's the loss of innocence or it's the loss of optimism or something. But this was the beginning, and had it stood alone, maybe it would not have been so much with my generation to this day, but one after the other.
Now, what's being referred to here is the terrible year of 1968, where in the spring of that year, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And 2 months later, right here in Los Angeles, President Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, was assassinated. So at that point, yes, I mean, it would have been very hard to have faith in our institutions. Yes.
One question about the video that you showed and the pictures that were on the slides. At the moment of the shot, it seemed that the president collapsed straight down. And you showed the picture from the room that possibly he got shot from. It showed that street completely from the side. How could it have been like that he collapsed straight, but the street, the window that the assassin was sitting in was completely from the side?
All right. I'll give you the short answer, then I'll give you the longer answer. The short answer is, I don't know. The longer answer is that you are asking exactly the sort of questions that JFK assassination researchers have been asking since November 1963. And the thing that is kind of remarkable about, and I call it the conspiracy rabbit hole, and I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean, when people become involved with this, when they become obsessed with it, they can literally stick with this topic for decades. And so, while I don't think we will ever truly know what happened to President Kennedy, I do believe that the research done by very well-intentioned folks out there is going to continue. Anything else? What else? Yes.
I was wondering what the public reaction was when you heard the also was shot.
I think by that time, people were a little numb. It was, what next? I think that there was also a concern that, we didn't really learn much from Oswald, did we? And I think that may have been the moment at which the conspiracy theories began to gain credibility, because, really, why would you shoot him? Jack Ruby said that he did it because he was very much a Kennedy fan and he wanted to save the First Lady and her children the emotional pain of coming back to Texas for a trial. Anything else?
Oh.
Yeah.
Did they find out who shot his brother?
Sirhan Sirhan. Here's a weird factoid about Sirhan Sirhan, who, by the way, is still alive. At the time, he was a Pasadena City College student. And Sirhan Sirhan, he's never really given a rationale for what happened at the Ambassador Hotel in 1968. He claimed at one point that he was a Manchurian candidate. Some of you may remember the 1962 film that was later remade with Tom Cruise in recent years. And he claims that he was somehow hypnotized into being an assassin. Anyhow, I would like to see some closure on Sirhan Sirhan. Well, we are now near 1:30. They will be starting the Oliver Stone film in San Gabriel 334. And have a good rest of the day.